I'm Helena Carter, and I'm 28. The champagne glass trembled in my mother's hand as she stood at the head of the table, her smile sharp as broken glass. Let's toast my beautiful daughter, Emily, she announced to the engagement party guests. At least one of my daughters figured out how to land a man. The other one will probably die alone with her cats. The words hit like ice water. 23 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me, some pitying, others amused by the spectacle. And trust me, nothing says loving family like being publicly humiliated at your sister's engagement party. Emily's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, her diamond ring catching the chandelier light. I didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't give them the satisfaction they'd been hunting for all these years. Instead, I simply raised my left hand and let the light catch the platinum band circling my ring finger. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that mahogany-paneled dining room, but something tells me the real fireworks were just getting started. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Now, let me back up and tell you how we got here. The Carter family has always been about appearances. Perfect house in the perfect neighborhood, perfect social circle, perfect expectations. And then there was me. Apparently their biggest disappointment since New Coke. For 28 years, I'd been the family failure. The daughter who chose freelance graphic design over law school, who wore jeans to charity galas, who dared to think independently in a family where conformity was currency. Revolutionary stuff, really. Emily, 3 years younger, had always been the golden child. Sorority president, marketing executive at dad's firm, engaged to an investment banker with the right pedigree. She checked every box on mother's checklist for acceptable daughters. I apparently checked none, unless there was a box for constant source of maternal disappointment, in which case I was overqualified. The engagement dinner was supposed to celebrate Emily's triumph. Instead, it became the night I finally played my hand. Because sometimes the best revenge is just showing up authentically to someone else's perfectly orchestrated performance. Growing up in the Carter household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy from day one. Emily was the princess, destined for greatness. I was the cautionary tale, the one they pointed to when discussing the importance of making proper choices. Helena refuses to network properly, Mother would sigh to her friends over afternoon tea. She could have had such a bright future in corporate law, but she insists on this artsy nonsense. The artsy nonsense, for the record, was my thriving graphic design business. I specialized in branding for small businesses and startups, work that fulfilled me and paid my bills quite comfortably. But try explaining profit margins to people who think success only counts if it comes with a corner office and a secretary. It's like explaining color theory to someone who's colorblind, technically possible, but ultimately pointless. Every family gathering was the same performance. Aunts asking when I'd find a real job. Cousins sharing updates about their promotions and corner offices while I smiled politely and changed the subject. Uncle Richard making jokes about my little art projects. Because apparently creating visual identities that help businesses succeed is just an adorable hobby, like stamp collecting or competitive knitting. The wedding bouquet tradition was the absolute worst part. At every Carter family wedding, every cousin's ceremony, every friend's reception, I was physically pushed toward the center of the crowd during the bouquet toss. Not subtle suggestions, actual hands on my shoulders, propelling me forward while relatives chanted, "Helena's turn, Helena's turn." Picture this. A grown woman being shoved into a crowd of desperate bridesmaids like some sort of matrimonial sacrifice to the romance gods. The dignity was overwhelming, truly. I caught exactly 0 bouquets. Not because I couldn't, but because I refused to participate in their theater. I'd stand there like a statue while flowers flew over my head, watching other women scramble for silk roses and baby's breath. Call it passive resistance. Call it stubborn pride. I call it maintaining whatever scraps of self-respect I had left. Then came the post-bouquet commentary. Poor Helena, they'd murmur just loud enough for me to hear. 28 and still single, maybe she's too picky, maybe she's not trying hard enough. Because clearly, my relationship status was the most pressing issue facing humanity at that moment. What they didn't know was that I'd been quietly building a life they couldn't even imagine. While they obsessed over my relationship status, I was creating something beautiful, something real, something that would soon turn their entire narrative upside down like a perfectly executed magic trick. The comments started getting more pointed after I turned 25. Family dinners became exercises in subtle warfare, with Mother leading the charge and Emily playing the role of sympathetic sister. Helena's just focused on her career right now, Emily would say, her voice dripping with false understanding. Not everyone can balance love and work like we can. Like we can. As if finding a man was some sort of skill Emily had mastered while I remained hopelessly incompetent. Trust me, watching Emily pretend to be the supportive sister while simultaneously throwing me under the bus was like watching performance art. If performance art was specifically designed to make you want to scream into a pillow. Father was less subtle. Your sister's building a life, he'd announce during Sunday roasts. You're building… what exactly? Websites? The word websites dripped from his mouth like something distasteful. Never mind that my websites had won design awards and generated six-figure revenues for my clients. Never mind that I owned my own home, paid my own bills, and answered to nobody but myself. In the Carter universe, independence only counted if it came with a husband-shaped validation stamp. What mattered in their world was perception. And the perception was that Helena was the family failure. The spinster daughter who couldn't land a husband despite her expensive education and decent looks. Because apparently, in their minds, being unmarried at 28 was basically the same as having 3 heads and a subscription to Crazy Cat Lady monthly. The worst part wasn't their criticism, it was their pity. The way aunts patted my shoulder at Christmas dinners, the knowing looks exchanged when I arrived alone to family events, the carefully worded questions about whether I was putting myself out there or maybe being too selective. I learned to deflect with humor. Still interviewing candidates, I'd say with a smile. The position has very high standards. What I didn't say was that none of them would meet even the basic qualifications. Things like, treats me with respect, and doesn't think my career is a cute hobby. But inside, their words carved little wounds. Not because I believed them, but because they reminded me daily that love, in their world, was the only thing that mattered. Career success, personal fulfillment, independence, all worthless without a man's validation. Charming worldview, really. Emily's engagement had shifted the dynamic into overdrive. Suddenly, every conversation became about wedding planning, marriage advice, and pointed comments about how some girls just have the touch when it comes to relationships. Tonight's engagement dinner had been the culmination of 28 years of this treatment. Mother's toast wasn't cruel, it was honest. This was really how they saw me. Their professionally successful, financially independent daughter was nothing more than a failed romantic project, which made my next revelation all the more satisfying. Sometimes the best plot twists are the ones nobody sees coming, especially when they're too busy writing you off to notice what you're actually doing with your life. Have you ever experienced family members who refuse to see your success because it doesn't match their definition of winning? 3 months earlier, while Emily was busy planning her engagement party, I was standing on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean, saying, I do to the love of my life. And yes, the timing was absolutely perfect. Getting married while your family is obsessing over someone else's upcoming engagement. Talk about flying under the radar. His name was Daniel Hawthorne. I'd met him at a business conference in Chicago, where he was giving a keynote about sustainable investing, and I was attending workshops on digital marketing trends. He approached me during the networking reception, curious about the design portfolio I was reviewing on my tablet. That's brilliant work, he said, pointing to a logo I'd created for an eco-friendly clothing brand. Clean lines, perfect color psychology. You understand how visual identity drives emotional response. Most people saw pretty pictures. Daniel saw strategy, psychology, the deeper mechanisms that made design effective. We talked for 3 hours about branding, business philosophy, and the art of authentic communication. And not once did he ask me why a nice girl like me wasn't married yet. Revolutionary concept, right? He was nothing like the men my family would have chosen for me. Yes, he was successful, more successful than they could have imagined, but he was also quiet, thoughtful, more interested in substance than flash. He drove a hybrid instead of a sports car. He read books instead of just watching sports. He asked about my dreams and actually listened to the answers. Shocking behavior for a man, according to my family's dating standards. We dated for 8 months before he proposed. Not at a public restaurant with orchestrated fanfare, but during a quiet morning on his terrace. Coffee cups steaming between us as sunrise painted the city gold. I love your mind, he said, ring box balanced on his knee. I love how you see the world. I love that you create beautiful things and refuse to apologize for who you are. Marry me, Helena. Let's build something extraordinary together. No mention of biological clocks or family expectations, just a man who wanted to partner with me because he actually liked who I was. Novel approach, truly. We planned a small ceremony in Tuscany, Intimate, authentic, surrounded by rolling hills and honest emotion instead of social expectations. The kind of wedding where love mattered more than logistics, guest count, or impressing people you barely tolerate. I sent invitations to my parents 6 weeks before the ceremony. Elegant cardstock with gold lettering, complete with travel details, accommodation suggestions, and a handwritten note explaining how much their presence would mean to me. I included first-class airline tickets, hotel reservations at a 5-star resort, everything arranged and paid for, because I wanted no barriers between my family and this moment. Call me optimistic, but I actually thought they might want to celebrate their daughter's happiness. Silly me. Then I waited for their response, for excitement, questions about dress codes, requests for additional details. Instead, I got silence, which looking back should have been my first clue that something was very, very wrong. The silence stretched for 2 weeks before I finally called. Mother answered on the third ring, her voice distant and distracted. "Helena, darling, I'm so busy with Emily's wedding planning. Did you need something? Did you get my invitation?" I asked, my stomach already sinking. "For my wedding in Italy?" A pause. Then, "What invitation, dear?" "I sent it 3 weeks ago, with plane tickets and hotel information. My wedding is in 5 weeks, Mother." Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear Emily's voice in the background, something about flower arrangements and color schemes. Because apparently color-coordinated napkins were more pressing than their other daughter's life-changing news. "I'm sure I would have remembered receiving something like that," Mother said finally. "Perhaps it got lost in the mail? You know how unreliable postal service can be these days." "Lost in the mail?" "Sure. Because the postal service has a secret vendetta against Carter family wedding invitations." That makes perfect sense. My heart sank, but I tried again. "I'll call the airlines and reissue the tickets, and I'll send new invitations by overnight delivery. This is important, Mother. I'm getting married." "Of course, sweetheart. Though I have to say, the timing is rather challenging with Emily's engagement party and all the preparations. But we'll certainly try to work something out." Try to work something out. As if my wedding was a scheduling conflict rather than a life-changing moment she should want to share. Like I was asking them to attend a PTA meeting instead of watch their daughter marry the love of her life. I called Father directly, hoping for a different response. He sounded genuinely surprised by my news, but his confusion seemed authentic. "No invitation here, Helena. Are you sure you sent it to the right address? We haven't moved in 15 years, but perhaps the mail carrier made a mistake." His tone was kinder than Mother's, but the result was the same. No awareness of my wedding, no excitement about meeting Daniel, no questions about why I'd kept such enormous news secret, just puzzlement and vague suggestions about postal incompetence. I sent new invitations overnight, along with reprinted tickets and detailed itineraries. This time I paid for signature confirmation, tracking numbers, delivery receipts. Every possible safeguard against another postal mishap. Because apparently I needed to treat my wedding invitations like classified government documents to ensure delivery. The new invitations arrived at their house on Tuesday morning. I tracked them online, confirmed delivery, even called their landline to make sure they'd retrieved the package from their front porch. No response, no phone call, no acknowledgement. By Thursday, I was forced to accept the truth. My parents weren't planning to attend my wedding. Whether they'd received the invitations or not, their silence spoke louder than any words. And trust me, when your own parents can't be bothered to acknowledge your wedding, it really puts family dynamics in perspective. Emily's engagement party proceeded on schedule, complete with champagne toasts about successful daughters and pointed comments about lonely spinsters. Which brought us to tonight's revelation. Sometimes the best way to solve a mystery is to let it solve itself in front of an audience. The ring on my finger caught the dining room light like a small star, impossible to ignore. The silence stretched until Emily's fiancé, Brad, cleared his throat awkwardly. "So," he said, his voice unnaturally bright, "Helena got married? When did this happen?" All eyes turned to me. Mother's face had gone pale, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand. Father leaned forward, his expression cycling between confusion and something that might have been concern. Emily looked like she'd swallowed something unpleasant, which was interesting considering she was supposed to be happy for me. 6 weeks ago, I said calmly, in Tuscany. It was beautiful. "You got married in Italy?" Emily's voice pitched high with disbelief. "Without telling anyone?" "I told everyone," I corrected, enjoying the dramatic pause more than I probably should have. "I sent invitations 8 weeks ago. First-class tickets, hotel reservations, detailed itinerary, everything you needed to attend." Mother found her voice. "Helena, we never received any invitations. We would have remembered something that important." I sent them twice, I continued, maintaining my composure despite the pounding of my heart. The second time with signature confirmation. Someone at this address signed for the package. Father set down his whiskey glass with careful precision. Are you saying we deliberately ignored your wedding? I'm saying the invitations were delivered and signed for. I have confirmation from both FedEx and the airline. The question is what happened to them after they reached your front door. The table erupted in murmurs. Guests exchanged glances, sensing drama but unsure of the details. Emily's hand fluttered to her throat, a nervous gesture I'd noticed since childhood. And suddenly, watching her panic, I knew exactly what had happened to my wedding invitations. This is ridiculous, Mother said, her voice sharp with defensive anger. We would never ignore your wedding invitation. There must be some mistake. Then let's solve the mystery, I suggested, pulling out my phone with theatrical flair. Because if you're going to expose family sabotage, you might as well do it with style. I have the tracking numbers right here. We can see exactly when the packages were delivered and who signed for them. The color drained from Emily's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Brad reached for her arm, but she was already falling apart like a house of cards in a windstorm. You okay? She stammered something about needing air, but I was already pulling up the FedEx tracking information. The delivery details were crystal clear. Signed by E. Carter at 11:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. E. Carter, Emily Carter. My sister had signed for my wedding invitations and made them disappear. And trust me, discovering that your own sister sabotaged your wedding is the kind of family bonding moment that really brings everyone together. Or not. E. Carter. I read the name aloud, my voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence like a blade. Delivered Tuesday, November 15th at 11:47 a.m. Emily's face cycled through several shades of pale before settling on a sickly green. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. And honestly, watching her squirm was almost worth missing my parents at my actual wedding. Almost. That's impossible, she whispered. Emily Catherine Carter. I continued reading from my phone screen because nothing says family dinner like a good old-fashioned public humiliation. Full signature on file. Same signature that's on your credit card receipts and employment contracts. The engagement party guests had gone completely silent. 23 people watching a family drama unfold in real time, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. This was definitely not the evening entertainment they'd expected, but honestly, it beat whatever small talk they'd been making about the weather. Mother's voice came out as a strangled whisper. Emily, what is she talking about? My sister's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. No clever explanations, no innocent misunderstandings, just the slow, inevitable collapse of someone caught in an unforgivable lie. And trust me, watching the golden child crash and burn is quite the spectacle when you've spent 28 years being treated like the family disappointment. Father set his napkin down with deliberate precision. Did you sign for your sister's wedding invitations, Emily? I can explain. Emily's voice cracked on the words. Go ahead, I said, slipping my phone back into my purse. I'm genuinely curious what explanation could possibly justify intercepting someone else's mail and destroying their wedding invitations. This should be good. The tears started then. Not the elegant, sympathetic tears Emily had perfected for maximum effect, but ugly, desperate sobs that made her mascara run in black streams down her cheeks. Apparently, being caught red-handed doesn't bring out anyone's best look. You don't understand, she gasped between sobs. You've always been the smart one, the independent one. This was supposed to be my moment, my time to be the successful daughter. By sabotaging my wedding? You never told us you were even dating anyone seriously. Then suddenly you're sending wedding invitations like some fairy tale princess, stealing my thunder right before my engagement party. The self-centeredness was breathtaking. Even for Emily. My wedding was somehow about her thunder, because apparently, in Emily's world, the universe revolves around her special moments, and everyone else is just supporting cast in the Emily show. What do you think will happen next when a family finally sees their golden child for who she really is? The explosion came from an unexpected source. Brad, Emily's fiancé, stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. You did what? His voice was deadly quiet, more terrifying than any shouting could have been. You deliberately sabotaged your sister's wedding because you were jealous? Emily reached for his hand, but Brad pulled away like she'd burned him. The look on his face was one I'd never seen before, complete revulsion mixed with genuine shock. And honestly, Watching Brad discover his fiance's true character in front of a dinner party audience was like watching a live-action karma demonstration. Brad, please, let me explain. Explain what? Exactly. How you stole mail that wasn't yours? How you made your family miss their daughter's wedding out of pure spite? Brad's banker training was showing. He understood implications better than anyone else at the table, and what he was seeing clearly horrified him. Father's voice cut through Emily's protests like ice. 28 years of teaching you right from wrong, Emily. And this is who you chose to become? Mother had gone completely silent, staring at Emily as if seeing her for the first time. The perfect daughter, the golden child, revealed as someone capable of unthinkable cruelty toward her own sister. Trust me, watching your parents realize they've been backing the wrong horse for 3 decades is quite the emotional journey to witness. The engagement party cost $40,000. Mother said suddenly, her voice hollow. We gave you $40,000 for this celebration, Emily. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. $40,000 to celebrate the engagement of a woman who had deliberately destroyed her sister's wedding day. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a cake knife. Emily tried again. I panicked. I saw the invitations and I panicked. Helena was supposed to be the family failure, not the one getting married first. Not the one with the perfect fairy tale romance. Stop. Father's command silenced her instantly. Just stop talking. Brad was already pulling his phone from his pocket. I need to call my parents. Tell them the engagement is off. Brad, no! Emily lunged toward him, but he was already walking toward the door. I can't marry someone who would do something like this, he said without turning around. I won't build a life with someone capable of this level of manipulation and cruelty. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. And just like that, Emily's perfect engagement was over. Courtesy of her own sabotage finally coming to light. Sometimes justice really does serve itself. Mother buried her face in her hands and began to weep, not the delicate tears of a society matron, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal and broken. My God, she whispered through her fingers. Helena, what have we done? Finally, the right question. Only took them 28 years to ask it. The aftermath of Emily's revelation hit the family like a tsunami. Within hours, the story had spread through their entire social circle. By morning, Mother's phone was ringing constantly with questions from friends, relatives, and curious neighbors. Nothing travels faster than scandal in a small social circle. And trust me, this one had everything. Family betrayal, wedding sabotage, and a very public meltdown. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, feeling strangely detached from the chaos I'd unleashed. Emily had retreated to her childhood bedroom and refused to come out. Father had canceled his golf tournament. Mother had canceled her book club meeting for the first time in 15 years. The Carter family's perfect facade was crumbling faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. The $40,000 they'd spent on Emily's engagement party took on new meaning now. Money that could have funded a trip to Italy. Money that could have paid for their accommodation and meals during my wedding week. Money that had instead celebrated the very person who had stolen their chance to witness my happiness. The irony was so delicious I could practically taste it. Father called me Tuesday morning. His voice sounded aged, fragile in a way I'd never heard before. Helena, we need to talk. Can you come to the house? Are you sure? I wouldn't want to upset Emily further, because God knows we couldn't risk disturbing the princess in her tower of shame. Emily forfeited the right to comfort when she intercepted federal mail, he said bluntly. And we forfeited the right to call ourselves your parents when we failed to notice how badly we'd failed you. Well, that was unexpectedly honest. Credit where credit's due. When my father finally figured something out, he didn't mess around with half measures. The house felt different when I arrived. Smaller somehow, less imposing than the fortress of judgment it had always seemed. Mother was waiting in the living room, her eyes red and swollen, her usual perfect composure completely abandoned. Sit down, sweetheart, she said, gesturing to my father's leather armchair, the one I'd never been invited to sit in during 30 years of visits. We owe you more than an apology, Father began. We owe you accountability. 28 years of favoritism, of dismissing your achievements, of treating you like a disappointment when you were actually the daughter we should have been proudest of. Mother's voice was barely above a whisper. Your wedding invitations were beautiful. Helena, I found them in Emily's room yesterday. The hotel looked like paradise. The ceremony details were so thoughtful, so personal. You planned something extraordinary and we missed it because we raised a daughter capable of destroying her own sister's happiness. Tell me about him, Father said. Tell me about your husband. Help us understand what we lost the chance to celebrate. For the first time in my adult life, My parents were actually asking about my life instead of lecturing me about my choices. It only took a complete family implosion to get their attention, but hey, better late than never. His name is Daniel, I began slowly. Daniel Hawthorne. The name hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds before Father's expression changed completely. And trust me, what happened next was worth waiting 28 years to see. Daniel Hawthorne, Father repeated slowly as if testing the words. The Daniel Hawthorne? Hawthorne Industries? I nodded, watching his face process this information. Mother looked confused, but Father had gone pale. And honestly, watching him realize exactly how spectacularly they'd messed up was almost therapeutic. Helena, he said carefully, are you telling me you married Daniel Hawthorne? The renewable energy mogul? The man who's been featured on the cover of Forbes 3 times? Among other magazines, I confirmed with a slight smile. Though he prefers when they focus on the technology rather than his personal wealth. Mother's eyes widened as understanding dawned. How wealthy are we talking about? Exactly? Father was already pulling out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Within moments, he was showing Mother articles about Daniel's company, his net worth, his philanthropic work. The numbers were staggering even by their social climbing standards, and watching them process it was like watching someone's entire worldview collapse in real time. 800 million, Father read aloud. Estimated net worth of $800 million, self-made fortune in renewable energy technology, youngest CEO to make the Fortune 500 list in the last decade. Mother's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo through the silent house, because apparently, discovering your failure daughter married a near-billionaire will do that to your motor skills. You married a billionaire, she whispered, and we missed it because we were too busy favoring the daughter who sabotaged you. I didn't marry him for his money, I said firmly. I married him because he's brilliant and kind and treats me like an equal partner. The money is just a bonus. Father set down his phone and looked at me with something approaching awe. Helena, do you understand what this means? The connections, the opportunities, the social standing? I understand what it means to you, I replied coolly. But I fell in love with Daniel before I knew about his wealth. He introduced himself as a sustainability consultant and drove a Prius to our first 3 dates. But surely he mentioned his work, his passion for clean energy, his concerns about climate change. The business empire came up much later, after I'd already fallen for the man who remembered my coffee order and asked thoughtful questions about my design philosophy. Mother was staring at me as if I were a stranger. All this time, we thought you were throwing your life away with freelance work and unmarketable skills. But you were building something we couldn't even comprehend. I was building a life that made me happy, I corrected. The fact that it also happened to be incredibly successful by your standards was purely coincidental. Shocking concept, I know. Father leaned forward, his voice urgent. Does Daniel know about how we've treated you? About last night? He knows everything, I said. He's known from the beginning that my family didn't value me. He's been very patient about it, actually. Patient, Mother repeated weakly. He kept asking when he'd get to meet you. I kept making excuses about scheduling and distance. Eventually, I had to admit that my family and I weren't close. The implications were sinking in now. Not only had they missed my wedding, but they'd missed the chance to forge a relationship with one of the most powerful men in renewable energy. In their world of social climbing and strategic networking, this was a catastrophe beyond measure. And watching them realize it was absolutely priceless. We need to fix this, Father said, pacing the length of the living room like a caged animal. There has to be a way to salvage this situation. Salvage what, exactly? I asked, genuinely curious about his thought process, because watching my father desperately try to figure out damage control was like watching a masterclass in panic management. The relationship? The connection? Helena, this man could open doors we didn't even know existed. The charity boards, the investment opportunities, the social circles. And there it was. Even in their newfound remorse, they were still thinking about what Daniel could do for them rather than what they had lost by failing me. Some things never change, and my parents' ability to make everything about social advancement was apparently eternal. Dad, I said gently, Daniel doesn't care about your social connections. He has his own charity foundation, his own investment portfolio, his own social circle. He's not looking for networking opportunities through his wife's family. Mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. But surely he'd want to have a relationship with us now that we understand the situation better. Would he, though? I leaned back in the forbidden armchair, feeling the expensive leather conform to my shape. Daniel's very protective of me. When I explained why my family wasn't at our wedding, his exact words were, "Their loss, my gain." He's not particularly interested in people who only value others for their utility. Father stopped pacing. What do you mean? I mean Daniel grew up wealthy. He can spot social climbers and opportunity seekers from miles away. The fact that your interest in meeting him only materialized after learning about his net worth would be transparent to him. The brutal honesty was liberating. For 28 years, I'd soft-pedaled their behavior, made excuses for their favoritism, protected their feelings while they trampled mine. No more diplomatic half-truths, no more gentle corrections, just facts, served ice-cold with a side of reality. "So what do we do?" Mother asked, her voice small and defeated. "You could try being genuinely sorry," I suggested. "Not sorry that you missed a networking opportunity, but sorry that you spent 3 decades treating your daughter like a consolation prize." Father's face flushed red. "We were trying to motivate you to reach your potential. By constantly telling me I was worthless? By pushing me toward a career I never wanted? By treating Emily like a princess while I was invisible?" I stood up, surprised by my own calm. "That wasn't motivation, Dad. That was just cruel." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. "We never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "Intent doesn't negate impact," I replied, a phrase Daniel had taught me during one of our many conversations about family dysfunction. "You hurt me repeatedly, systematically for decades. The fact that you didn't mean to doesn't erase the damage." Father slumped into his own chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "How do we even begin to make amends for that kind of failure?" "You start by acknowledging it. Really acknowledging it, not just when it becomes inconvenient for you." I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. "And you accept that some relationships can't be salvaged just because you finally realize their value." "Helena, wait." Mother's voice broke on my name. "Please don't give up on us entirely." I paused at the doorway, considering her words. "I'm not giving up on anything, Mother, but I'm also not going to pretend the last 28 years didn't happen just because you're finally paying attention." "Will we ever meet Daniel?" Father asked quietly. I thought about that for a moment. Daniel, who had held me while I cried after every family gathering. Daniel, who had encouraged me to set boundaries when their criticism became too toxic. Daniel, who had built a life with me that was completely independent of their approval or acceptance. "Maybe," I said finally. "But it would have to be on our terms, not yours." 3 months later, I stood in our penthouse kitchen, watching Daniel read the morning financial news while I prepared coffee. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the life we'd built together. Art from my favorite galleries. Books stacked everywhere. Plants thriving in every available spot. The doorbell interrupted my peaceful morning routine. "Expecting anyone?" Daniel asked, looking up from his tablet. I peered out the window and saw a familiar silver sedan in our visitor parking area. My parents. And honestly, after 3 months of silence, I was curious what had finally driven them to make an unannounced appearance. Daniel raised an eyebrow. We'd talked extensively about my family situation, and he knew this unannounced visit was significant. "Want me to handle it?" he offered, already standing. "No," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "I've got this." I opened the door to find both parents on our doorstep, looking nervous and formal. Father wore his best suit. Mother carried flowers and what looked like a handwritten letter. The whole presentation was so carefully orchestrated it was almost touching in its desperation. "Helena," Mother began tentatively, "we were wondering if we could have a few minutes of your time." "Both of you?" "We've been doing a lot of thinking," Father said quickly, "about how we failed you, about what kind of parents we really were." I studied their faces, looking for signs of the performative apology I'd expected. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine humility. It was almost shocking, honestly. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They entered our home with obvious awe, taking in the expensive furnishings and spectacular view. But their focus remained on me, not our possessions, which was progress of sorts. "This is beautiful," Mother said softly. "The whole space feels like you. Creative and warm and thoughtful." Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Nothing about his appearance screamed renewable energy mogul, which was exactly how he preferred it. "Mom, Dad," I said. "This is my husband, Daniel." The introductions were awkward but not hostile. Daniel was gracious without being warm, polite without being welcoming. He understood that this meeting was about me, not him. "We brought you something," Mother said, offering me the letter. "It's not an apology exactly. More like An acknowledgement. I read it while they sat nervously on our couch. 2 pages of handwritten text detailing specific instances of favoritism, emotional neglect, and cruel treatment. Not excuses or justifications, but a straightforward accounting of their failures as parents. We also wanted to give you this, Father said, holding out a cashier's check. The amount made my breath catch. $40,000. Exactly what they'd spent on Emily's engagement party. It's not payment for forgiveness, he said quickly. It's acknowledgement that we invested in the wrong daughter's future, and we want to balance the scales. Even if it's too late to matter. I looked at Daniel, who shrugged slightly. The decision was entirely mine. What about Emily? I asked. Mother's expression tightened. Emily moved out last week. She's staying with friends, trying to figure out her next steps. She asked us to tell you she's sorry. For whatever that's worth coming secondhand. We know we can't undo 28 years of mistakes, Father added, but we're hoping for a chance to do better. I folded the letter carefully, thinking about forgiveness versus reconciliation, about justice versus healing. I'm not ready for a close relationship, I said finally, but I'm willing to start with honest conversations. If you can commit to seeing me as I actually am instead of who you wanted me to become. Relief flooded their faces. Yes, Mother said quickly. Anything you need. Daniel squeezed my shoulder supportively as I showed them to the door 30 minutes later. They'd asked thoughtful questions about my work, expressed genuine interest in my design philosophy, and treated me like an adult whose opinions mattered. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, but it was a beginning. How do you feel? Daniel asked as we watched their car disappear down the street. Lighter, I said, surprising myself with the truth. Like I finally stopped carrying weight that was never mine to begin with. He kissed the top of my head. Your family's lucky you're generous enough to give them a second chance. Maybe, I agreed. But I'm luckier that I found someone who saw my worth before they did. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving your worth to people who doubted you. Sometimes it's building a life so fulfilling that their approval becomes optional instead of essential. Either way, Helena Carter was no longer anyone's consolation prize. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth when your family can't see it. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone else's inability to see it, even when that someone is supposed to love you unconditionally.